Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third part of the first ever episode of Dragon's Digits, the show where we believe everyone has the ability to analyze League of Legends at a high level. In the first two parts, we nailed down the basics needed to conduct valuable data analysis and went over some of the major pitfalls of improper data analysis. But in this part, we're going to address the most critical tactic in breaking down player performance, which is player style. Well, a player's role, which is not the same thing as their position, like AD carry, mid, top, whatever, on a team can shift from game to game, and most top players can play a variety of styles. We're going to define player style as the role within the team a player fills most frequently and most skillfully, what they feel most comfortable doing, and what they do most often. For top, mid, and ADC, I like to break player style down into two scales: high versus low resource consumption and high versus low focus. So let's break down what I mean by each scale and support my claims through examples from the past summer split. For resource consumption, minion and monsters are limited resources, so every team is tasked with the tough choices of who gets allocated what share of the available gold and XP throughout the map. The main goal for every team is to get the most utilization per minion or monster, or kills, or any source of gold and XP. So splitting the resources evenly is almost never the optimal play. In League of Legends, it's just not the best way to do things. If you split your gold evenly, it's not as effective as bundling it all on one or two people, and that's been proven in the past. That's why funneling was so popular. So usually that's not the way they go about it. Certain players are better able to utilize controlling a high share of the team's resources. We'll call these players high resource players. Examples of high resource players in North America are Power of Evil, Doublelift, and Huni. Stats you should look at when determining whether a player is high or low resource are CS share after 15 minutes, earned gold per minute, and share of the team's gold. So to take down here to these stats, I've sorted by ADC, mid, and tops who've played more than 5 games in the North American Summer Split 2018. So if we sort by how much gold they earned, this excludes starting gold and inherent gold generation. So it's basically how much of this variable gold income they're getting per minute. You see that the players with the highest totals are Doublelift, Power of Evil, and Sven. And those give you a general idea of players that are more resource heavy as opposed to players that are less resource heavy, but sometimes it could depend, depending on the length of the games or how successful the player's being or how successful the team's being. But that gives you a pretty good idea of what you're looking for in a high resource player. Just because a player is a high resource player, it doesn't make them good, and just because they're a low resource player, it doesn't make them bad. Right? It just depends on, it's just the style they feel most comfortable playing, and any good team is going to have a combination of different both resource and focus styles. So speaking of low resource players, certain players are better able to make use of champions with limited resources and support those with the majority of the team's resources. We'll call these players low resource players. Examples of low resource players in North America are Ryu, who's now retired, Arrow, and Impact. Some stats are used to determine low resource players. With both high and low resource players, look to their damage output compared to players getting a similar amount of resources to determine who the most effective players are. If you're comparing a guy who's getting a lot of resources to a guy who's not getting a lot of resources, it's unfair to expect the guy who's getting less resources to be contributing the same amount to the team as the player who's getting a high amount of resources. So you have to try to compare them to players getting similar amounts of resources. It's critical to the success of any team to have quality, supportive, and low resource players. So getting talented low resource players is perhaps the most important challenge for most teams, because it's fairly easy to see who's able to succeed with a lot of resources, but it's harder to see who's able to make the most value out of a low resource player. So out of low resources. So the proper mix of high and low resource players allows for optimal utilization of every source of gold on the map and is key to a successful team. It's also a key to breaking down an individual's success to understand what role they play within their team. In addition to resource share, the other key aspect of player role is focus level. So moving on to focus level, it's perhaps a bit more hard to visualize the resource share. It doesn't necessarily easy to tie into stats or easy to see in the game, but a player's focus share is basically the amount of attention the player likes to play around, both from allies and to enemies. Much like the minions and monsters on the map, the individual champions, most specifically the junglers, have a limited amount of time, so they have to choose which lanes they plan on focusing around and who they plan on ganking most often. Certain players are able to shine with their lane as the focus of the game, with both junglers coming and with people roaming to the lane. These people use their high mechanics and aggressive tendencies to take over the game. These players are what we call high focus players. Legendary players Faker and Uzi are perhaps the best example of high focus players, as they are able to change the entire face of the game they're in, shifting strategies specifically to try to shut them down or get them going. It's a bit more complicated with Faker than with Uzi, as his versatility is pretty incredible, but that's not really a topic for this video. It's a pretty in-depth thing. Examples of high focus players in North America are Power of Evil, Doublelift, and Licorice. Now, you may be looking at this list I have right here and seeing Doublelift, Power of Evil, and Licorice pretty high on the list of what I was talking about of high resource players, and thinking, well, if they're high resource, are they always high focus? And that's definitely not the case. High focus players can be high resource players like Doublelift and Power of Evil, or low resource players like Ryu and Darshan. Stats for tracking focus are a lot less reliable than resource share, but key stats include first blood percentage, kill participation, and kills per game. If you're a big focus of the team, especially early game, it's going to bump up the amount of kills you're a part of, it's going to bump up the amount of first bloods you get. So all those are pretty self-explanatory, but they're just a bit less effective. As you can see, if we take these same positions and sort by first blood percentage, you see the top two people in first blood percentage are Darshan and Ryu, who are both definitely low resource players in terms of the CS share they get and just the stake of resources that they get and the damage they're able to do. So they can definitely be high resource players or low resource players. Now, contradictory to the previously outlined style, some players prefer to play a more isolated style, whittling down their lane opponents through superior 1v1ing and 2v2ing, and utilizing excellent positioning to help clean up team fights or support their fed carries. These low focus players often take a back seat to the high focus players, but are sometimes even more important. Examples of low focus players in North America are Damonte, Stixxay, and Lorelo. They can also be high or low resource players, but usually end up falling around the middle of the resource scale. Key stats for successful high focus players are high kills KDA and high first blood percentage, while key stats for successful low focus players are good lane stats and low deaths. So if we take a look at some lane stats, if we take a look at the highest gold differential at 10, you will see people on this list like Stixxay's here, Damonte's here. I mean, Lorelo's a bit lower, but that's mostly because his team sucked. And so you see they definitely have good lane stats. And then if you compare their sort of share of the gold, you'll see it's pretty middle of the pack across the players in the league. That's for low focus. So anyways, in conclusion, the most successful teams make the best use of the resources they have, both in terms of gold generation as well as player time, and that can only come from a successful mix of player styles. When breaking down how successful a player is, we must factor in their resource share and focus level. Now this is specifically for top, mid, and ADC. It's also true for jungle and not really support, but it's a bit different, so I like to look at jungle and support a bit differently. So often high focus players get all the attention, specifically players I deem as high, which are high resources, high focus. They're your sort of traditional carry players, or people like Doublelift or like Jensen that get most of the focus, most of the time, like Caps in Europe, you know. Well, top level lower focus players just end up getting overlooked, right? So it's a bit of a dichotomy, but it's important to pay attention to all of them, and some of the lower focus players are just as important as the high focus players. Okay, so now we've gone through the basics of data analysis, the impact of winning and team styles, and the different player styles and roles, as well as their significance. But in the final part of the first ever episode of Dragon's Digits, we're going to have to put all that together and more as we crown my vote for the most underrated player in the LCS. I'll see you there, folks. I look forward to it.